good to see everyone and to be here. Alex, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Welcome tonight for our discussion on abolition, feminism, and decriminalizing sex work. My name is Alex, and I go by they, them, and sha pronouns. And I am a gender fluid Filipino and Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewish person. And my visual description is I am a light pale brown person because of the shitty weather in San Francisco. And I have long brown hair and a ponytail. I'm wearing a black sweater with a smiling sun over my heart. And I have a gap in my front tooth. Yeah. Oh yeah, my background says I am releasing relationships that are not rooted in mutual care and respect. And I'm passing it to Tatiana.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, my name is Tatiana, and I am a comrade of yours. And very happy to be here with y'all tonight. I am a non-binary femme presenting yet trans masculine person. I'm in a lavender room. There's a white sheet hanging down. I'm like pale person because yes, the weather in San Francisco has me looking a certain way. With dark hair, I have bangs. I'm wearing dark reddish brown lipstick. I have butterfly wing earrings. I'm wearing a red orange jumper, gray wool sweater. I have a chain and a lavender colored t-shirt and 3 buttons on my chest. Yeah, and with that, we're going to go ahead and do a land acknowledgement, do a little opening, and then we'll introduce our first speaker. So yeah, we acknowledge that San Francisco is located on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ramaytush Ohlone peoples, who are the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula.
And we encourage all non-Indigenous members to uplift the work of rematriation and to pay your land taxes. You can go to the link below at www.ramaytush.org/donate to pay your land taxes.
Right. We want to be intentional with how we are creating Black, Indigenous, and POC-centered spaces.
We want to move forward by creating practices to prioritize Black, Indigenous, people of color members and proactively decenter whiteness and dismantle white supremacy, anti-Blackness, misogynoir, and colorism.
Because of that, we will open our facilitated discussion to be open only to Black, Indigenous, and people of color, first centering LGBTQ+ and disabled Black and Indigenous people of color, with the last 5 minutes being open for all, such as non-Black and Indigenous people of color. We are mindful of creating a BIPOC-centered space in the breakout rooms as well. So please DM Gracie, who's the white coordinator. Thank you, Gracie, if you are a white person, so that we can mindfully arrange the breakout rooms. The chat is open to everyone. However, I'm sorry, go ahead, Alex. I'm lying.
No, it's okay. The chat is open to everyone. However, we ask white folks to please be mindful over taking up too much space. The Zoom sessions will continue to be open for everyone to join. And there's always Discord as well.
So please contribute to our mutual aid fundraiser. We are trying to have all of our speakers paid, prioritizing our BIPOC speakers. So there's our fundraiser, and share it with your people, share it with your crew, share it with, I know some people who are really good at shaking people down for money. So I know y'all are out there. But.
And next we'll have Kari and Tiera, or whoever of the two would like to introduce themselves to go over collective care.
Hi, I'm Tiera. I am 20 years old. I'm a student at CCSF. My pronouns are she, her. I am a dark-skinned Black woman. I'm wearing lavender glasses. I've got really dark brown eyes. My hair is currently pulled into a scarf with like a huge top knot. And I have a white background I'm wearing just a really plain white hoodie with a gray shirt under that's kind of peeking out. But other than that, I look really plain. Oh, and I have a nose piercing. I have a stud in my nose. Yeah, so collective care, I just want to say oh, thank you, Kari. I'm just so grateful to be sharing this space with all y'all. So collective care, we just really, anything that you guys need, please reach out to Kari and I, or either one of us. I just do want to recognize that I completely understand that our last class was hard and a lot of y'all were affected and it caused a lot of anxiety. And we also felt that anxiety as a Black woman. So I just want to let y'all know you are not alone. I am trying my best, and so is Kari and all of the collective members, to take steps to make sure that that does not happen again. And if something similar does, we can take care of all y'all. So please watch out for some resources to come out for ways that we can do self-care and take care of you guys. If there's anything you guys need, please reach out. If there's anything you guys want added to the class that you think will be helpful for you guys to be taken care of, please let me know. And thanks.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tiera. Hey y'all, it's Kari. She, her pronouns are fine for me. Quick descriptor, I am a lighter skinned Black person with a curly top of hair and big black headphones, looking a little like 90s, and some big earrings, a light denim shirt with a little collar, and behind me is a very colorful picture and a white wall. And I wanted to just say thank you so much to the folks that shared space with us last time, and all of the just love and intention that folks put into the space. I'm looking forward to continuing to build with y'all. Thank you also to folks who provided feedback. I have a couple people that I'm hoping to get back to, but everybody's feedback was so helpful and insightful, and I really just am so grateful to be learning with y'all. If there's anything that Tiera and I could do during this class to make things go more smoothly and more comfortably for folks, please DM us. Or if you feel so moved to be out here doing things in public, that is always an option. We just also are down for folks who don't feel as comfortable like interrupting or speaking up or in the chat to everybody. So yep, whatever is accessible to you. Thanks everybody. Thanks Alex and Tatiana.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Tiera.
Thank you. So I guess we are going to get our night started, and our first speaker is going to be Tanaya Lunsford Lynx, who is a writer, abolitionist, yes, big round of applause, and fourth generation Black San Franciscan on both sides. Tanaya is a proud alum of Voices of Our Nation, VONA, and the Lambda Literary Retreat. In 2018, she co-curated Still Here, VI, sorry, I can't read Roman numerals, Existence as Resistance, a performance featuring queer Black San Franciscans as a part of the National Queer Arts Festival. Tanaya has been awarded an individual artist grant from the San Francisco Arts Commission, as well as residencies at the Headland Center for the Arts. the San Francisco Public Library, in collaboration with Radar, Mesa Refuge, the Rising Voices Fellowship at Vermont Studio Center, Oxbow, the Erica Landis Scholarship at Squaw Valley Community of Writers, and the Grace Paley Fellowship Under the Volcano. In 2018, her work was published in Foglifter, the Lambda Literary Anthology, and in Nothing to Lose But Our Chains, Black Voices on Activism, Resistance, and Love. It's a pleasure to introduce her, and please take it away.
Beautiful. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you, Alex. That was a really long bio. So yeah. So y'all know more about what I look like on paper now, but I'm Tanea Lunsford Lynx. My pronouns are flexible. So she, he, they all work for me. I am a teacher at City College of San Francisco. I teach in the African American Studies Department, Women's and Gender Studies Department, and Labor and Community Studies departments. This semester I'm teaching WGST 25, so Intro to Women and Gender Studies with my brilliant co-teacher, Likia Lumsden. I'm also teaching AFM 60, so African American Women in the US, which is a late start class starting later this month, so on the 27th, the week of the 27th, we'll start. And I'm teaching a class that's a dual enrollment class with John O'Connell, which is Labor and Community Studies 81, organizing for social justice. So I get to be with high school students this semester as well. As far as the image description, I am a Black American non-binary femme. I have thick curly hair coming down from a scarf. I have brown skin, and I'm wearing a button-down shirt, and I have a geometrical pattern behind me that actually has my initials in it, if you look kind of closely, and then that you can see a little bit of my couch in the back as well. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. I'm glad to be talking with y'all a little bit about intersectionality, knowing that this is just the tip of the iceberg. We could easily talk about intersectionality and intersectional feminism for a whole semester, but we're just going to talk about it for a little bit tonight. What you should know about how I'm approaching this work and approaching our time together is one, that I'm really grateful to be here, thinking about a future outside of surveillance and outside of punishment and prisons and jails. I grew up in San Francisco as someone who was particularly impacted by prisons and jails, visiting a parent locally and throughout California in prisons and jails, and knowing, even within my little self, that there had to be a different way than this, and that this was not right, and that we as a collective were not well if this was something that was normalized. And so part of the reason I'm so grateful to be here is because I feel like I'm moving into a future with you all and getting to dream. So often in our organizing spaces, we get to critique and break apart and break things down, but we don't so much get to actually dream and create. And so I'm hoping that we can do some of that tonight together as well. I'm a writer, I'm an artist, I'm a restorative justice practitioner, although I don't do that so much anymore, but it does influence the ways that I approach this work. I'm going to be sharing some slides, and then I'm also going to be sharing a clip of a video. I'm going to keep those pretty short because I know that bandwidth may be an issue. Generally, when I share something that's video, I turn my camera off so that bandwidth is not as much of an issue. So that's kind of what to expect. Okay, so I actually wanted to start our time together with this poem by Lucille Clifton, and it's called Won't You Celebrate With Me? I am going to read it, and then I want us to actually just listen to it again in Lucille Clifton's voice. I'm so glad that we have it in her actual voice. It makes such a difference. So you'll hear it from me for the first time. It says, it's called Won't You Celebrate With Me? Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I expect to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed. So you can sit with that. I'm gonna exit out of this so that y'all can hear it in Lucille Clifton's voice.
Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model. Born in Babylon, both non-white and woman, what did I see to be except myself? I made it up here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight my other hand. Come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me and has failed.
Yes. So I bring y'all this piece not only because it's brilliant and gives me so much life, but also because when I think of intersectionality, this is just one of the many ways that it presents. And this is just one of the many ways that it weaves itself into our art and into our lives. Creating models, having resilience, fighting back against systems and social relationships that are so much bigger than us, and living to sing about it and talk about and tell it about it. Yeah, it also reminds me that everything I know about what I'm talking to y'all about was taught to me by Black women and femmes, and that also makes me so happy. So intersectionality was a term coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. And it's a term that has become more popularized over the years, particularly in terms of intersectional feminism. I think most folks' more recent touch point with intersectional feminism came about during the Women's March and a call for intersectionality. And I think oftentimes it was called intersectionality when really what folks meant was actually a call for accomplices, was actually a call to step and move outside of white supremacy and white censored feminism, but also a call in to actually be anti-racist in the approach and to uplift and support Black women and Black women in femmes leadership. So although the term was coined in 1989, it gave succinct language to a lineage of Black feminist thought and frameworks that have existed for hundreds of years. And so this is one of the ways it came to be in one of the papers published by Kimberly Crenshaw. So she said, because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, any analysis that does not take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated. And so for the purposes of our conversations today and the ways that I approach intersectionality in my classes, I include cis and trans Black women, femmes, non-binary folks, gender expansive folks, et cetera, in this definition and in this work. I wanted to actually give y'all a chance to see Kimberly Crenshaw kind of breaking down the concept of intersectionality in her own words through a study that kind of brought her to the understanding. So I'm going to show a clip that's about 2 or 3 minutes or so in just a moment. But before I did that, I wanted to show you this kind of matrix, essentially, of these different identities. And so I like this visual because it seems to be moving. There are all these kind of different circles and they're overlapping on each other because we're not single issue people. We're not single identity people. We have all of these complex layers, and oftentimes they are moving because we're transforming and transitioning. We're aging, we're moving through things, we're coming into money, we're losing money. We're being oppressed by these systems in different ways and being perceived by people and systems in different ways. And so when I think about intersectionality, I think about it as something that is moving and changing and something that's not necessarily static. So I'll come back to this visual in just a moment, but for now I wanted to show this video clip. I actually have it preloaded on another thing to the spot where I want it. So here we go. For context, this is a longer TED Talk. I'll drop the whole link in the chat for folks to revisit, but we're just going to watch a few minutes where Kimberly Crenshaw is talking about how she came to use the term intersectionality. I'm going to turn my camera off so I don't lag. Here we go.
Years ago, I began to use the term intersectionality to deal with the fact that many of our social justice problems like racism and sexism are often overlapping, creating multiple levels of social injustice. Now, the experience that gave rise to intersectionality was my chance encounter with a woman named Emma DeGraffenreid. Emma DeGraffenreid was an African-American woman, a working wife, and a mother. I actually read about Emma's story from the pages of a legal opinion written by a judge who had dismissed Emma's claim of race and gender discrimination against a local car manufacturing plant. Emma, like so many African-American women, sought better employment for her family and for others. She wanted to create a better life for her children and for her family. But she applied for a job and she was not hired, and she believed that she was not hired because she was a Black woman. Now, the judge in question dismissed Emma's suit. And the argument for dismissing the suit was that the employer did hire African Americans and the employer hired women. The real problem, though, that the judge was not willing to acknowledge was what Emma was actually trying to say, that the African Americans that were hired, usually for industrial jobs, maintenance jobs, were all men. And the women that were hired, usually for secretarial or front office work, were all white. Only if the court was able to see how these policies came together would he be able to see the double discrimination that Emma DeGraffenreid was facing. But the court refused to allow Emma to put two causes of action together to tell her story because he believed that by allowing her to do that, she would be able to have preferential treatment. She'd have an advantage by being able to have two swings at the bat when African American men and white women only had one swing at the bat. But of course, neither African American men or white women needed to combine a race and gender discrimination claim to tell the story of the discrimination they were experiencing. Why wasn't the real unfairness law's refusal to protect African American women simply because their experiences weren't exactly the same as white women and African American men? Rather than broadening the frame to include African American women, the court simply tossed their case completely out of court. Now, as a student of anti-discrimination law, as a feminist, as an anti-racist, I was struck by this case. It felt to me like injustice squared. So first of all, Black women weren't allowed to work at the plant. Second of all, the court doubled down on this exclusion by making it legally inconsequential. And to boot, there was no name for this problem. And we all know that where there's no name for a problem, you can't see a problem. And when you can't see a problem, you pretty much can't solve it.
So I'm going to pause it there. And I'll stop sharing that one. And essentially, I wanted to bring y'all that in a way to encourage you to watch the rest of the video because it's that example goes even further to the analogy of the actual intersections, thinking about locating an issue in a more precise way. So acknowledging all the ways, we'll get into this in a moment, all the ways that systems are marginalizing folks, erasing folks, not seeing folks, right? So the next thing I want to do is have folks think about identities that are specific to you. So what identities do you hold? I want to give folks a moment to write down as many of your identities as you can. And for reference, I'm going to bring back up this visual, this matrix that has kind of all these different options, including ethnicity, age, class, race, religion, gender expression, ability, disability, etc. I'm going to give folks just a moment to write down as many of your identities that you can. I'm going to give you about 10 more seconds to do this. Obviously, this is not an exhaustive practice, but wherever you can, just thinking about all of these parts of you that exist together that are kind of moving together through the world, informing your experiences. Okay. And so with this information, I want you to hold on to, they want me to play it so bad. I want you to hold on to these identities because I'm going to get you into breakout groups. And essentially, I want you to think about in your groups, based on the intersections of your identities, or the places where they overlap, the places where they're in you, how have you been targeted, failed, or pressed up against the state? So based on the intersections of your identities, how have you been targeted, failed, or pressed up against the state? And so thinking about targeting, whether that's something like being followed in a store, thinking about failure as something as far as the public school system, thinking about being pressed up against the state, I'm thinking about things like surveillance and punishment and having the state intervene, right? Are there places based on the intersections of your identities where you've experienced these things? And then again, I also want you to think about, based on the intersections of your identities, how have you been given power over others? How have you been given the benefit of the doubt? How have you been given freedom or autonomy outside of the state? Knowing that for these things, some of these we may not have ever experienced or may not ever remember experiencing. Like I said earlier, this is kind of just our partial movement into intersectionality. Again, we could spend a whole semester on this. But for right now, I want you to just kind of hold these two questions. For now, what I'm going to do is stop sharing so that I can drop the questions in the chat. If you have questions for me, feel free to ask them. But what I would love for you to do is take a look at these questions that are going to be in the chat. And I'm going to send you to small breakout groups to talk about your experiences of these things. So being targeted, failed, or pressed up against the state, as well as being given power over others, being given the benefit of the doubt, and being given freedom or autonomy to exist outside of the state, right? Free from surveillance or free from having your every move kind of picked apart and punished, right? So I'm gonna stop sharing for a moment so that y'all can see those questions in the chat, and then I'm gonna send you to breakout groups. Allows us to see the resilience of folks. It allows us to see the resilience of folks in our communities, particularly those impacted by the violences of our systems. It allows us to signal a need for solidarity and collective power. And it allows us to create solutions for more power and more joy for more people, more of the time. And so as much as it is a magnifying glass of the challenges, it's also a call to create new ways of being and to lift up ways of knowing, primarily Indigenous ways of knowing that have always been kind of true and within the fabric of our communities. but it also invites us to learn, say, remember, and tell their names and their stories. So when I say that, I mean folks who have been murdered, have been marginalized, have been pushed to the margins, have been erased and extinguished, etc. And so it reminds us to avenge the suffering of our ancestors and to gain really the trust and the love and the honor of future generations, in the words of Mary Hooks. And so essentially it's a call to action. It's a call to action to center and uplift cis and trans Black women, femmes, and gender expansive folks. And it's a call to be in solidarity and practice power with. And lastly, to be in deeper understanding of our privileges and to create a willingness to interrupt institutional violence when we notice that other folks are experiencing it in every way that we can. And so that's that for today. I'm grateful to have been able to spend this short time together. I'm hopeful that as we're in community together, we get to discuss some of this more and pick some of this apart and practice better, practice deeper. But for now, I'll leave y'all with this. And I'm so grateful to CCSF Collective for inviting me and for y'all for being here and being in community with me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tanaya. It's always wonderful to see you and to hear you speak and to share all of your knowledge and brilliance. So it was just really, really great. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker. Brooke, are you up in here? You ready? Okay. So.
Hey,
Brooke
sorry.
Lober. You're good, you're good. I'm just going to.
It's all good.
You're good. All right. I'm going to introduce you and then the floor is yours, okay? Okay. Brooke Lober is the Director of Harm Reduction at the St James Infirmary, an occupational clinic for sex workers, and teaches classes in women and gender studies at Sonoma State University. Brooke has been an activist for more than a decade in Jewish feminist queer sectors of the Palestine Solidarity Movement. This activism has extended into her scholarship as she has studied and published numerous essays on Jewish cultures of resistance as they relate with the Palestine Solidarity Movement and their ongoing resonance in the cultural work, spiritual practices, and activism of contemporary Jewish anti-Zionism. For the last 5 years, Brooke has worked closely with members of anti-imperialist feminist organizations that were well known in the Bay Area in the 1980s and 90s. Having completed a set of oral histories of this era, Brooke is now co-editing a volume of writing about the group Out of Control, Lesbian Committee to Free Women Political Prisoners, for the lesbian journal Sinister Wisdom. Brooke is a longtime abolitionist activist, member of Abolition Collective, and co-editor of 2 forthcoming volumes of writing on abolition feminisms. Brooke's writing has been published in Feminist Formations, Women's Studies, the Journal of Lesbian Studies, Meridians, Feminism, Race, Transnationalism, and on numerous websites of radical culture. All right, everyone, here's Brooke. Thank you.
Hey, thank you. I have slides to share. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, let me just give me one moment here. Sorry.
Okay.
You should be able to now.
All right, thank you. And sometimes, please excuse, sometimes you can hear my landlord's drain coming down. Hopefully that'll be the only extra noise. Let's see. All right. So I know I was asked to do a visual description of myself. And I'm not sure, when I first got that note, I thought maybe I should do visual descriptions of the other artwork that I show. So maybe maybe the facilitators can tell me if I should be doing that throughout. But I'll describe myself. So I'm, let's see. Okay, yeah, I'll keep trying to do visual descriptions throughout. So I'm a 44-year-old Ashkenazi Jewish white femme person who has curly hair and And tonight I'm wearing a fancy kind of silky white shirt because it's Kol Nidre. Tonight is the beginning of Yom Kippur, which is the Jewish New Year. And when I was thinking about doing this talk, I wanted to start out with this photograph by Esmat El-Halabi. And so what we're looking at is a photograph of like a warehouse that might be under construction. And it says, no cops, no jails, no linear fucking time. And not only is this a kind of magical abolitionist statement, it also questions the idea of linear time, which Judaism also does. So Judaism is sometimes described as architecture in time. It creates space in time. And maybe that is a meaningful imaginative practice for you all to imagine what it would be like if tonight was the first night of the new year. So I wanted to start out by reading briefly some writing about abolition that I did with the Abolition Collective last year in a publication called Making Abolitionist Worlds. And we wrote, rather than setting the limit of our radical imaginary at oppositions to the conditions of genocidal warfare that make up the prison system, in camaraderie with the queer world making of Jose Munoz, we might figure abolition as a perpetual horizon, a utopian hermeneutics. And hermeneutics is like an interpretive framing. So abolition as the utopian hermeneutics. Horizons guide and direct our work, but as they perpetually recede ahead of us, they also refuse to let us become complacent with half measures, finished solutions, or reformist reforms. Such an open-ended project of liberation inspires us to build, to create, and with Frantz Fanon, remain always those who question. So I want to thank the CCSF Collective for having me here tonight. This is such a sophisticated and beautiful course of study that you all have chosen to enter together. And I love how beautifully local it is. It's really amazing, all the people that you're going to be welcoming this semester, and I'm really honored to be one of them. So thank you for having me here. During this talk, sometimes I'm gonna read, and sometimes I'm gonna like scowl my face up because I'm gonna be like, what did somebody just write in the chat? And sometimes I'm gonna be like looking down because I'm gonna be reading off my phone because I'm kind of low tech and I don't really know how to do everything at the same time on my computer. So, so thanks everybody for having me here and hopefully being a little bit patient with me. All right. So I wanna have a brief content warning. This presentation does include discussion of gender-based violence and also resistance against gender-based violence, which I think is a generative place to be learning and thinking from, and all of this in the context of racial capitalism and the carceral state. The organizers of this course told me that this class has already been through some hell together, and I just want to make sure that you all know that as far as I'm concerned, the most important thing is that that we feel well and able to be open, right? And feel like well enough that our minds can be open to these materials. And if that's not what's happening tonight, I encourage you to take some space away and do what you need to do to take care of yourselves and to take care of each other. You're also welcome to interrupt me with questions, although I'll probably be kind of feeling like I'm racing through material, but stop me if you need to. All right, so this first image looks like a kind of series of antique valentines, and it has two hands that are kind of line drawn through it, actually a linoleum cut print. And it says, with a ribbon running through it, it says, "Dear sex workers, we love you, St. James Infirmary." And this art was made by my friend, Amanda Preeb, and she's doing some new artwork for St. James Infirmary, which is where I work. And so this presentation is partly going to be from the perspective of my work as the director of harm reduction at St. James Infirmary. And I'll talk a little bit about my work there as I go through this presentation. So the first part of this presentation is called Dismantle, Change, Build. And I took that from the organization Critical Resistance, and I linked to their website on this slide. I'll give you all access to this slideshow when I'm done with this presentation, so you don't need to take notes on it. You'll have it for yourself and you can click through all the links. I'll be talking a little bit from the great wealth of knowledge that I learned by reading this book, All Our Trials, Prisons, Policing, and the Feminist Fight to End Violence by Emily Thuma. And one of the things that Emily Thuma writes that's such a concise, I think, formulation of what I want to talk about is the anti-carceral current of the 1970s and early 1980s and the feminist prison abolitionism of the 21st century share a genealogy, one that reminds us of the interdependence of struggles, the multiplicity of feminisms, and the power of coalition. So in the first part of my presentation, I'm going to try to attune us a little bit to the link between that legacy of the anti-carceral feminisms of the 1970s and 80s and current feminist prison abolitionism. So what I'm doing here is I'm giving a few examples. Oh, sorry about that. I knew I would make some mistakes. Okay, so I'm giving some examples of anti-carceral feminist legacies specifically from the Bay Area. So I'm starting off with this example of Lesbians Against Police Violence. And Lesbians Against Police Violence is a group that worked against police harassment in San Francisco in 1979 and 1980. They were founded in response to an incident of police violence against two women, Sue Davis and Shirley Wilson, two lesbians who were leaving a bar in the Mission, a famous bar named Amelia's, and they were arrested by San Francisco Police Department officers, and they were beaten while they were in custody. And so this group formed and ended up making some kinds of coalitional projects with other anti-police and anti-incarceration groups around the Bay Area. And in this photograph, you can see a group of people marching behind a banner that says Lesbians Against Police Violence. And sort of in the back, you can see that there's a sign that says No More Prisons. And I thought that that was an important, one legacy to flag. What I want to say about what I'm presenting here is I'm starting with dismantle, and then I'm moving through change, and I'm going to build, and I'm going to kind of reiterate that. So I think that Lesbians Against Police Violence are an example of a group that was working to dismantle harmful systems, in particular, the system of police and prisons. These next photographs are flyers that are surrounding an image, a photograph of Jane Siegel, an elder lesbian activist who I've been working with for the last several years to document the history of the group Out of Control Lesbian Committee to Support Women Political Prisoners. That group formed in San Francisco in January 1987. Some of you might know about Bo Brown, who was a member of the George Jackson Brigade that did robberies on behalf of the Black Liberation Army in the 1970s. Bo and Jane, along with several others, were founders of this organization to support women political prisoners. This organization was specifically formed to respond to the Lexington Control Unit, and the Lexington Control Unit was officially called the Lexington High Security Unit. It was a sensory deprivation and isolation facility, basically a solitary confinement lockdown located in the basement of a federal prison in Kentucky. And it was created to house specifically 3 women political prisoners, Sylvia Baraldini, Susan Rosenberg, and Alejandrina Torres. Baraldini and Rosenberg were white anti-imperialist militants from New York City, and Torres was convicted for her involvement with the Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, the FALN. And so these women political prisoners who were really tortured by the US state were the subject of mass movements for their freedom. And Out of Control, based in the San Francisco Bay Area, was a lesbian organization that worked on their behalf. This organization linked up leftist politics, lesbian visibility, and anti-prison activism, and they promoted that work within feminist, queer, and also leftist political spaces. When they won when they were part of a national campaign, a large coalition to win the closure of Lexington, they continued public advocacy for the next 20 years. And I want to just kind of flag a little bit of what they brought together by doing this sort of direct support work to support people who were targeted by the state. As self-identified dykes, they promoted lesbian visibility and women's participation in leftist formations, countering homophobia and sexism on the left, but they didn't require women activists within their organization to be lesbians. So in that way, they challenged the separatism and narrowness of kind of what was commonly taken as identity politics at that time and sometimes afterwards. They increased the visibility of political prisoners and revolutionary internationalism in lesbian, queer, and women's movements. For example, representing the cases of women political prisoners at Gay Day, which was what Gay Pride was called back then. With a focus on state violence, they exposed the misogyny and homophobia of the punishment system, especially as it affected women political prisoners. They published a newspaper called Out of Time, and with that newspaper, they communicated with people who were incarcerated and connected them with each other, as well as with supporters outside of prisons. Through their presence at the first Critical Resistance Conference in 1997 and their participation in related networks, they influenced the movement for prison abolition. In the beginning of the prison abolition movement, they really insisted on the participation and the visibility of women, queer people, working class people, formerly incarcerated people, and political prisoners. So that's another part of our, I think, Bay Area legacy. Some of you might be familiar already with the movement to free Inez Garcia. Inez Garcia was criminalized for defending herself against a brutal attack. And in Emily Thuma's book, All Our Trials, she writes about 4 intertwined cases in which women of color were criminalized for self-defense. These cases were the case of Joanne Little, Inez Garcia, Yvonne Wanro, and Desi Woods. But the movement to free Inez Garcia was especially popular in the San Francisco Bay Area because the entire incident happened in Salinas and the trial was close by. What Emily Thuma writes is that the Viva Inez campaign was a decentralized movement that attracted a wide range of participants and endorsers, including the Third World Women's Alliance, the San Francisco-based organization Concilio Mujeres, the National Conference of Puerto Rican Women, and the San Francisco Gay Men's Group Combating Sexism, as well as members of the Black Panther Party and the United Farm Workers. And what we're looking at here was a poster that was popularizing her campaign. And you see a drawing of Inez Garcia and a quote by her: "I was defending myself, and I believe every woman has the right to defend herself under these circumstances." And there was a lot of civil disobedience and mass movement that was really dramatic around the Inez Garcia case, and it all took place in San Francisco. So I encourage you to read chapter 1 of Emily's book and learn more about that. So finally, I wanted to give a couple examples of like what is building, right? When we talk about dismantling, right? And we talk about direct support, and then we talk about building alternative cultures. Usually we're talking about cultural projects. So I wanted to flag 2 cultural projects specifically from the Bay Area that we could think of as part of the legacy of anti-carceral feminisms of the 1970s, 80s, and into the 90s. And this is from the journal Ache. Jamie Swift recently wrote a kind of article historicizing this journal. And she writes that the goals of Ache were multiple. So she has 6 that I listed here from this recent essay, which is linked on this slide, to celebrate ourselves, our communities, and our accomplishments, to document Black lesbian history and culture, to provide a forum where issues impacting our communities can be openly discussed and analyzed, to keep Black lesbians in touch with each other's activities locally, nationally, and globally, to provide a place where Black visual artists and writers can develop and display their skills, and to help organize and empower ourselves so that we may become more effective allies in the struggle to end the oppression that we as Black people, women, and members of the gay community face daily. And the image here is the cover of a Che journal with a Black lesbian couple taking their child down the street. I think that another kind of exemplary moment in Bay Area kind of anti-carceral feminist histories is the founding of the Women's Building. And the Women's Building also, as the first site where San Francisco Women Against Rape emerged, was also a space of debate about the relationship between feminist anti-violence movements and the carceral state, which was growing precipitously right at the time when this building was founded and the movements within it were young. The San Francisco Women's Centers were founded in 1971, and they bought this building in 1979. So we're looking at an image of the Women's Building with this really vibrant mural on it. And the mural was created in 1994 by 7 women muralists. It's called the Maestra piece mural. And the mural depicts women throughout history and throughout the world with an emphasis on leftist social movements. And really, this mural exemplifies the cultural production of multiracial and anti-imperialist feminisms of the late 20th century. I think that a really good source for this kind of thinking into this term, multiracial feminisms historically, is Becky Thompson, and also I think the work of Emily Thuma specifically for this era. So I want to move into the abolitionism, the abolitionist feminism of the 21st century. So these terms, anti-carceral feminism and abolitionist feminism, really are different from each other. So not all anti-carceral feminists or feminisms of the late 20th century were what we would call abolition movements now, but they did question and often oppose the work of the carceral state. Really, I think that abolition feminism sort of found a defining moment in the founding of Incite Women of Color Against Violence. And so the Statement on Gender Violence and the Prison Industrial Complex, which was published in 2001, is sort of a foundational moment for the overlap of these two movements, abolition and feminism. And it starts with this, but I encourage you to read the whole thing, and probably a lot of you have, right? We call social justice movements to develop strategies and analysis that address both state and interpersonal violence, particularly violence against women. And I know that we just heard the voice of Kimberly Crenshaw, and really intersectional feminisms, I think in so many ways come out of feminist anti-violence movements really of this era, and Incite was building on that. So I wanted to read a little bit from Nadine Neighbor, who is a founding member of Incite and recently wrote about the transnational reach of the abolitionist politics that they were really defining at this time. And she does this through really thinking about the meaning of coalition. So Nadine writes, Incite's praxis of what we call a coalitional feminist of color movement of many movements articulated a politics that conceptualized the US-led prison industrial complex and US-led militarism as mutually constitutive. This coalitional approach was not simply theoretical. It emerged out of shared lived and ancestral memories of survivance and struggle. Incite forged a collective feminist of color embodied knowledge whereby activists embedded in struggles for immigration justice, decolonization of indigenous lands, Palestinian liberation, anti-war movements, and movements seeking to end sexual and intimate violence, and the prison industrial complex conjoined in one organizing space. And this is an early image. It was created by Fabiana Rodriguez in, I think, 2001, and maybe just a little bit later in opposition to US wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these are books that were published by Insight and also members of Insight contributing to The Revolution Starts at Home. And this is what I think that Thuma is referring to when she talks about the feminist prison abolitionism of the 21st century. These are some more contemporary books, and I'm excited to be a part of the one that you see all the way on the right, the new volumes of Abolition Feminisms that'll be published coming up this year by Haymarket Press. So what I was just talking about in the last part of this presentation was based on Dean Spade's formulation of mutual aid as a collective coordination to meet each other's needs, usually from an awareness that the systems in place are not going to meet them. So this is a three-part understanding of mutual aid. One is that mutual aid works to dismantle existing harmful systems or beat back their expansion. Another is that forms of mutual aid work to directly provide for people who are targeted by such systems and institutions. And finally, that mutual aid would work to build an alternative infrastructure through which people can get their needs met. And I do see mutual aid really as the basis of the work that I do at St. James Infirmary, which is what I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about. So I've been talking about kind of theoretical concepts, and I just want to emphasize that for me, this is all about theory through practice. And Elisa Bierria talks about theory through practice requiring epistemic humility, so that one may acknowledge the need to keep learning and be open to reaching different positions or discovering new ideas through practice, which cultivates an ethic of intellectual good faith and trust in a collective learning process as fellow thinkers pursue a practice that will hopefully be revelatory. And that's how I really experience my time in social movements, as a space of constantly learning. So I'm glad I get to share some of this more embodied community-based learning with you. What we're looking at here are images of signs from a mutual aid kind of fair that happened at Dolores Park not too long ago. This was a coming together of the Do No Harm Coalition, DPH Must Divest, the Defund SFPD, and also harm reduction organizations like the one that I work for. And you see Juliana, the director of harm reduction from GLIDE, up on the stage doing a presentation on how to do overdose reversals with Narcan. So I work in a partner organization to GLIDE and a number of other harm reduction organizations around the city.
Excuse me, Brooke?
Yeah.
Sorry, can we stop at 7:15? We're actually going a bit over time.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
So St. James Infirmary is a peer-based occupational health and safety clinic for sex workers of all genders. We operate a free clinic, we offer therapy, do peer-based empowerment, and offer harm reduction services. We also have a transgender housing program, both a residential space and also a housing voucher program. And we also do policy work and advocacy, advocating for the decriminalization of sex work and the decriminalization of drugs. For me, the work that I do at the St. James Infirmary is based on the notion of collective care. And I won't get to share all of it with you, but maybe I can share a couple images of the work that we do. So the framing of harm reduction as collective care in some ways is inclusive of, but also goes beyond basic human rights. It's part of the harm reduction movement that addresses pain and addresses harm with presence and with compassion. So it's in many ways a kind of form of community building. So what you see here is an image of a bunch of people around a pie because it's somebody's birthday. And this is an example of just some of the community-based and community-involved work that's happening at our harm reduction sites. So I work with injection drug users and other drug users, people who are in recovery, current and former sex workers, current and former people who are involved in the drug trade, people who are HIV and Hep C positive, and most of whom are survivors of overdose. And so St. James considers this to be a peer-based model for doing harm reduction work. And I'll end with some images of our harm reduction workers in the Tenderloin who do outreach and operate 4 syringe access and harm reduction sites per week. Our harm reduction work is led by current and former sex workers, queer and trans people who are working at the St. James Infirmary to provide this collective care. What I'd like to do is end here, but I actually want to invite you all to join us. So at the end of my slide presentation, I have just like a little invitation to an event. Maybe I can click through to it if that's all right. So I'm actually not able to give you my presentation on sex work. Sorry about that. But what I can do is hopefully just end by, this is on harm reduction. I will give you all this slide presentation. This is an upcoming event that we have where we're going to be inviting people to work with us on preparing some of the life-saving materials that we distribute around the Tenderloin each week. We serve more than 500 people per month with harm reduction supplies, peer support, and medical care. And I hope that you'll get in touch and come to one of our upcoming public events. Thanks for letting me go a couple minutes over.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brooke. Please share any resources and like invitations to events with us, and we can share it in our Discord and make sure that people are plugged in. And yeah, we really appreciate you coming and sharing with us. And sorry you couldn't share about sex work. I will be speaking about decrim later on, so hopefully I can cover that for you.
Go ahead and introduce our next speaker, who's my co-facilitator tonight, Alex. I'm just gonna quickly read their bio. So, sorry, they texted it to me. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say. So Alex Makulit, Quita, uses they, them, sha pronouns. They come from Filipino and Ashkenazi Sephardi Jewish heritage, and both their parents are immigrants. They're a formerly incarcerated and convicted person and a loved one of current and former captives of CDCR. They identify as queer, pansexual, gender fluid, many gender, femme, former full-service sex worker, and survivor of violence. And they were born and raised in San Francisco, Ramatush, Ohlone, but live in Wichin land in Oakland. They are a lifetime CCSF student, current Project Survive peer educator. I think we're supposed to present next week together. And most of their time is spent organizing for local and national sex worker rights, decriminalization of sex work, and against poverty with the US PROStitutes Collective and Global Women's Strike. They're a former organizer for All of Us or None, legal services for prisoners with children, and they are a farmer and herbalist in training, focusing on ancestral medicine of the Philippines, hoping to connect people to re-indigenizing and healing their relationships with food and the land. Everyone, this is Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, yeah, the bios were a lot. I wish I would have trimmed that down a little. But yeah, thank you all. I'm really happy to get to speak tonight. We did have someone else on the program, and it just worked out that I would be in place or that I'd have an opportunity to speak. So I want to talk about decriminalizing sex work. I know that it is a part of our topics tonight, and I want to talk about the importance of decriminalization and just work to not criminalizing shit, except for oppression, but not criminalizing it through the system that actively oppresses us. So yeah, I use they, them pronouns, and I'm a former full service sex worker. I organize right now with the US PROStitutes Collective, which is a collective of women and non-binary people and of all kinds of people who are current or former sex workers. And we campaign for resources and rights for sex workers and to decriminalize sex work and against poverty, so that no one has to go into sex work because of poverty. We believe that people should be able to choose to do sex work and safely leave sex work when they feel like it. And yeah, so really quick, I just want to talk about a couple of different things that go into it. I know I don't have a lot of time, but one thing that's really important is we say decriminalization. You're not going to hear a lot of people who are sex workers or people fighting for decrim talking about legalization, because just as we've seen with the cannabis industry, legalization doesn't do shit but reattach us to a system of oppression. And the whole reason why people go into any kind of work is to survive and to pay bills and to survive poverty and not live in poverty. So in order for us to address these issues of decriminalization, we have to look at poverty and abolishing poverty in order for us to find ways to allow us to survive in a non-criminalized way. And so this is why we talk about decriminalizing sex work. It does feed the prison industrial complex. If you are familiar with the list of demands that come from the movement for Black Lives, one of their demands is decriminalizing sex work, along with decriminalizing drug use and drugs. These laws that are in place that are anti-prostitution and anti-drug laws have consistently served to uphold racism. And I do want to mention too that the anti-sex work laws, like anti-prostitution laws, anti-trafficking laws, are specifically written to target people of color and immigrants and people who are living in poverty in the world. And so it's really important that when we look at decriminalizing sex work and recognizing that all forms of work can be exploitative, you're going to hear a lot of arguments sometimes that come from folks who are against sex work, saying like, oh, well, why don't we save all these sex workers and these prostitutes and put them into other jobs? But they don't mention how you can be exploited in a factory the same way that you could be exploited doing sex work, right? You can be exploited working at Burger King and McDonald's. You can be exploited working at an institution such as a school. So we have to keep that in mind when we think about being anti-capitalist and being abolitionists against prisons and police, because the institutions that do exist to criminalize people for survival are also upholding the police and prisons and all of that. And yeah, there's so much stuff. I want to make sure that there's time in the Q&A go over things. But the last thing I'm going to mention is that the US PROStitutes Collective has done a lot of work to help with the protection of sex workers. So right now, this past summer, we released a Know Your Rights booklet that I will drop in the chat for people to look at. And I'll share this in the Discord as well for people if you want to have a downloadable version to share with people. But we have actively worked towards some legislation and policies that will help ensure that sex workers will no longer be criminalized to a certain extent in the state of California. So, for example, it's illegal it was illegal for you to carry condoms on you. The police could stop you and tell you that you're going to get arrested for being a prostitute. Now, we did pass a bill. I believe St. James Infirmary did help alongside the work with this. And so there's plenty of organizations that have worked alongside with us to do this. But SB 233 is a bill that makes it so that the police cannot arrest you if you are reporting violence. Of course, I don't want to promote us going to the police because we don't believe that the police are even useful in our existence, but it is important that there are legal precedents like this because there are none elsewhere in the world where sex workers are protected like this. So I'm going to drop the brochure or the Know Your Rights booklet so you can learn more about some of the work we're doing. And if you have any questions, but yeah, it's super important. These things are super connected. The oppression against women and sex workers of all gender experiences is rooted in colonial violence that is connected to the prison system, which started off as the residential schools and the churches that came with the Spanish. So yeah, I don't know what else to say because I don't want to take up too much time.
Alex, we could actually have more time, like 5 more minutes to talk about decrim, and then also if Brooke wants to talk about harm reduction, we have an additional 10 minutes too.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So let's see. I do want to say that within the abolition movement, I think just as Brooke had mentioned earlier, that the abolition movement and like anti-carceral movement was not always the same thing. And I think that's very true as well within the abolition movement today, that there is such a thing. If people are aware in LGBTQ plus activism, when we're fighting for trans people, there is a group of people called trans exclusionary radical feminists or TERFs. And we also as sex workers deal with the same kind of people called SWERFs. So you got TERF and SWERF, not your shrimp and steak, but yeah, so we deal with a lot of folks like that too. And there are a lot of people out there who believe that sex workers are enabling misogyny and sexism, and that that we enable the patriarchy and stuff like that, when in fact we're taking advantage of the patriarchy and taking what's ours and taking our power back. But so there's groups of feminists out there that don't believe that we should be a part of this movement. And when I first started doing abolition work, this is just a little anecdotal story, but I was introduced to a group called the Revolutionary Communists Party, which is a big fucking mess. Yeah, you can learn about this on your own. It's all about learning these things on our own, but I think it's important to, what I learned from them is that there are women out there and people out there that believe that sex workers are the reason why oppression still happens. And I just want to say that it's not true. The reason why oppression still happens is because we live under a patriarchal capitalistic society that commodifies everything that we do, so that when people decide to take their power back, we are called crazy and shamed for it. And this is exactly the gaslighting that you see in the media around the work that we're doing here in this space, and just in all of our different autonomous groups that we work in. And yeah, I just want to say that this, just really quick, to wrap that up, is that SWERFs are very much alive in anti-trafficking movements, and a lot of laws that have been passed lately under the guise of anti-trafficking reform and whatnot are actually only to criminalize sex work. And so you're going to hear a lot about the Nordic model being mentioned if you look up anything about sex worker rights. And what that does is criminalizes our, yes, I can write those out. But yeah, the Nordic model, which criminalizes our clients. And so there's a lot of things that you're going to hear coming from the anti-trafficking movement that are going to blame sex workers for what's going on. And there are groups like Survivors Against SESTA that do work to combat this specific thing, because sex workers and people who have been trafficked and survivors of trafficking are actually in solidarity with each other, because all of these laws that are passed to supposedly help trafficking survivors and victims and criminalize sex workers actually hurt all of us. So yeah, there's so much more we can get into. If you look at the booklet that I posted, I can drop it again. There's so much information in there, and please feel free to reach out to me and others to, ask us questions and have more dialogue about this, because there's a lot of work to be done to decriminalize sex work and make the connections that decrim is an abolitionist issue. But yeah, and if Brooke wants to come on and talk about harm reduction, go crazy. I think decrim is also a pathway of harm reduction, because criminalization only leads to people dying. And we see this on the border with immigration, how they rape people on the border and try to criminalize them for being prostitutes to justify this violence. And maybe later on in another session, we can talk about this, but talk about how the violence against sex workers is an excuse. They justify violence against sex workers to justify violence against all other people, and particularly women. So yeah, let's talk about harm reduction if you're still here, Brooke.
Brooke, do you need help with screen sharing the section?
Sorry, I'm just getting back to my slides.
Okay.
Here, let me share my screen. All right, can you all see that?
Yes.
Okay. So thanks for asking me back. I'm just going to take a couple minutes and talk a little bit about the harm reduction movement. I can say, just to frame it a little bit, that I worked in harm reduction starting when I was a teenager. And so I think I started working in harm reduction in 1992 in Santa Cruz, California. And it kind of oriented me to queer and feminist and actually kind of form of harm reduction that was led by young women, which I think was an unusual place to be. So basically the harm reduction movement very much has been anchored by the coming out of the movement really to respond to the HIV epidemic, especially through gay and queer and trans mutual aid. The harm reduction movement really arose. We associate harm reduction with all of these tools. What you see here are harm reduction supplies, like a syringe, clean water, clean cottons, a clean tourniquet that can prevent things like bacterial infections and hepatitis C and HIV. I know that when I was a young drug user, just sharing a cooker one time, there was a 90% chance of contracting hepatitis C. And because of working at needle exchange programs, I was able to have access to these supplies that would prevent that. But it's important to know that harm reduction is not really about the tools. And I always try to emphasize that in my work. The Harm Reduction Coalition is a national organization, and it really incorporated in the late 1990s to become this kind of anchoring space where we could kind of crack open the door of a lot of community-based and state practice to allow for things that had formerly been illegal, like carrying paraphernalia like syringes, to make them legal. And it made a huge difference in the lives of people who use drugs. The Harm Reduction Coalition writes that harm reduction is a set of practical strategies and ideas aimed at reducing negative consequences associated with drug use. Harm reduction is also a movement for social justice built on a belief in and respect for the rights of people who use drugs. So I'm just going to walk us through the principles of harm reduction for a couple minutes. So this is all from harmreduction.org, the website of the National Harm Reduction Coalition. Harm reduction accepts, for better or worse, that licit and illicit drug use is part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore or condemn them. Harm reduction understands drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledges that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. Harm reduction establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being, not necessarily cessation of all drug use, as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. Harm reduction calls for the non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services and resources to people who use drugs and the communities in which they live in order to assist them in reducing attendant harm. Harm reduction ensures that people who use drugs and those with a history of drug use routinely have a real voice in the creation of programs and policies designed to serve them. Harm reduction affirms people who use drugs themselves as the primary agents of reducing the harms of their drug use, and seeks to empower people who use drugs to share information and support each other in strategies which meet their actual conditions of use. Harm reduction recognizes that the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capacity for effectively dealing with drug-related harm. And finally, harm reduction does not attempt to minimize or ignore the real and tragic harm and danger that can be associated with illicit drug use. One of the things that I think is important to keep in mind when we look at, for example, we're in the midst of an overdose crisis, a deadly epidemic, and it looks on the surface like that is the fault of a drug called fentanyl, right? A synthetic opiate that was invented in the 1960s and is quickly eclipsing the popularity of heroin. But fentanyl is actually not the source of the overdose crisis. These other structural issues, including including racial capitalism, the carceral state, the criminalization and stigmatization of drug users, and also forms of depression and isolation that arise from these kinds of conditions really are the source. And what we can do to address that source is become a more caring society. I know that later this semester, you're going to be hearing from the DOPE Project. So I think that I can end my little introduction there, and you all can get in touch with me if it's useful to connect and do more work together in harm reduction here locally. And like I said, we're having some public events each month as the St. James Infirmary, and there are others where we can make these kinds of material supplies together, and that actually means a lot to our team. So thanks for inviting me back for a minute.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for coming back and for doing that. The first part of your talk was really amazing, and I'm sorry we didn't have more time, but thank you so much for being able to.
Totally on me. Yeah, I'm sorry. 20 minutes turned into like 20 seconds. Thank you all for your patience with me.
Yeah. All right, everybody. We're going to have, sorry, I actually just blanked out.
We're gonna have our Q&A. All good. We're gonna have our Q&A for
Yeah.
first. And we know people that this is sort of dragging on a lot, so we try to be more mindful over the timing for the speakers alongside the Q&A or breakout rooms. But yeah, so discussion time now. Thanks, Tatiana.
And just a reminder, we are centering BIPOC during the first part of our Q&A, and we'll have some space allotted later for white folks to step in. And as always, the chat's open to all folks. That being said, do be mindful of the space that you take up. Thanks.
There's a comment in the chat from Little. It says, Narcan harm reduction care for all people who ID as femme-centered ladies night at the Mission Neighborhood Health Center on Cap and 17th on Thursdays from 6 to 8 with the amazing Mary Howe from the Homeless Youth Alliance. Oh, I guess, sorry, I didn't read that. I'm reading it out loud. Little is suggesting that they would be a good person to come to one of these classes to talk about harm reduction. And I guess, yeah, while I talk about that, the Homeless Youth Alliance is a really dope organization. I actually worked or was in connection with an organizer there when I was a homeless youth. And yeah, some really cool people that I actually grew up with are distributing Narcan. So if anyone is into bicycles and likes to bike around the city, an old friend of mine runs the Lost Souls Courier Collective. And if you find them on Instagram, Lost Souls Courier Collective, I can write it in the chat. You can DM them for Narcan and they will come deliver to you. So yeah, it's so important. And hopefully one of these sessions coming up, we have someone who can talk about administering Narcan and identifying overdoses. So yeah. I think Sean has their hand up.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, thank you for like being here representing the city, and thank you for like spitting like all that knowledge. That was awesome. I also wanted to say, if there's anybody that ever needs access to Narcan, I work for a nonprofit organization, which is still part of the nonprofit industrial or it's still a complex. And I work for the AIDS Foundation though, so it's like it's just like we go out and we work in harm reduction, and it's really intense. Like I definitely recommend people like knowing how to administer Narcan, and like one of the best ways, really quickly, another thing I wanted to do is answer that. One of the best ways to tell an overdose is if somebody's just like lacking color, like period, like say it's a pale skinned person, if they're blue and they're non-responsive, and hunched over, like that's definitely like, especially if you like clap at them or try and get their attention, like that is definitely a surefire sign that they're like ODing. Or if they're dark skinned, a lot of times they have an ashy appearance, like they're gray, and I just wanted to say that as well. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Sean, for sharing that. And I agree actually that it would be really fucking tight if we could have a Narcan training. If anyone, yeah, thank you. Narcan with the Freedom Community Clinic. Yeah, we're gonna actually, Freedom Community Clinic is gonna be having a healing circle here in our class later in the semester. So I know I love seeing all this harm reduction pop off in the chat. That being said, seeing how we do have a limited amount of time and we do also want to address collective care later, I would like to pose a question to Alex and Brooke and Troy, that like it's a question that we've been asking all of our speakers, and it's, how do you imagine us building an abolitionist world, and how does that vision overlap with the City College of San Francisco?
I can start. Let me pull up that question really quick. I definitely, so in my wildest dreams, how do I imagine us building an abolitionist world? Overlapping with CCSF. I mean, this is the start of it. Having a space where we can intentionally talk about abolition with each other. I know that there's a collective of teachers who are a part of this space right now, who talk about abolition in their classes and live lifestyles and promote abolition to their students and just in the community. And my wildest dream is that we have this as a requirement for general ed. And I felt this way about the Women 54 Politics of Sexual Violence. That should be required learning for all motherfucking students in the world, especially college students. I noticed that if you are a football player, when I was taking IDS C17 human sexuality with Bree, I realized that there was a lot of football students in my class, and they were only in that class because it's a requirement for football students or football players, sports players in City College. And so I think that Women 54 should be required for sports players too, especially because of the rape culture that is the sports industry. And yeah, so my vision is just that all of our classes would be connected to this, and that this is like a general required learning to be abolitionists in our community. And I know that they call us all utopians, but it's possible if we're able to organize ourselves as students like this, alongside faculty. We should be able to organize the school classes to be aligned with a world without prisons and police. So it overlaps because school is, I mean, we all learn at school, and this is the first place of our indoctrination. So if we're going to be indoctrinated with anything, it should be principles of abolition and mutual care work. In a place where hoes are welcome to be and not be afraid to be at school, and a place where we just like are sex positive everywhere, and also collectively want to abolish poverty. Yeah, that is all.
Troy, Brooke, would either of you like to take a chance with this question?
Sure. Troy, do you want to jump in?
I can go after, yeah.
Okay. I think that like thank you for asking the question. It's a beautiful question. I think that you know, City College is in a city, right? It's a college that's in San Francisco, and I really appreciate how generative City College is as a space where people can actually do so much organizing and so much learning. Fighting for City College itself is a very meaningful struggle. At the same time, I want to encourage City College students, like everybody else in the Bay, to really take action. And I'm afraid that I'm speaking to people who really already know this, but there's very egregious violence, of course, that's taking place in our region, and it's constant. I think that part of abolition really is about that notion of the horizon that's always receding in front of us. And so we don't arrive. And I hope that we don't seek to arrive, but just recognize that that struggle really is constant, that it's never ending. And that shouldn't mean that it depletes you and that it harms you, but rather that there's some kind of energy that we can learn from and that we can grow in, but also that in a sense we have a responsibility toward. I think in particular in the Bay Area, it's important to say that all of our elected officials are self-proclaimed liberals who use all of our social movements to promote their advancement. And at the same time, they kind of operate that in order to cover over their massive violence. The state of poverty criminalization, and in particular, the criminalization of poverty and the criminalization really of homelessness right now in the Bay Area is more extreme, actually, than elsewhere. Wealth inequality is more extreme, and all of the abolitionist struggles that you all are talking about and learning about are intensified here. So I guess I'm kind of in the fight, and I think I'm thinking more about that process than the arrival of like what happens after we cross that horizon. But just encourage everybody to dive into it, and I hope that City College, as it has been, will always, or at least for the time being, will remain a base of that.
This is Jai, she, they pronouns. I don't have coherent thoughts, but I think I often am thinking about how higher education and a lot of the education system is fully focused on reading as like the primary source of learning, and that's one a really ableist way to center one form of learning and education, right? Like we learn by doing also. We learn through each other and relationship building, and that is not often the case. And especially higher education becomes like this site of violence in so many different ways that I can't describe right now. But I just really hope that we are able to learn how to be in relationship with each other. I take a lot of lessons from Mia Mingus, a transformative justice practitioner, and she talks a lot about we don't know how to treat each other well. We don't know how to apologize and name our needs and ask for help. And that leaves so much room for more harm and violence, because state violence and interpersonal violence are always intertwined, right? They've always been connected, and there are cycles and cycles of it that run through our families. And so how do we stop that? I want to explore that and really practice like how to do all of those like quote unquote basic things and basic skills with each other. I'm actually organizing a transformative justice study group at San Francisco State, where we have talked about some of the things that this Build Abolition 101 course has talked about. And then we're also like, we also are gonna have dedicated sessions where we reflect on what self-accountability is, right? Because Miriam Kaba and other folks say that like, you can't hold other people accountable. You can only hold yourself accountable. So how do you model that and grow it on to a community level so we can address what the hell is gonna happen, right? When like your grandma is like slowly getting killed by your aunt, like in my case, like I still am very unsure, and I was very powerless in that moment. And so just how do we do all that messy shit? And so, yeah, I would say that is like the work that I really like emphasize on. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Troy and Alex and Brooke, for everything that y'all shared today, for your thoughts and perspectives. So much love to all three of you. And also to Tanea, who had to leave earlier in our session. I did share in the chat what Tanea how Tanea had answered the question back in the organizing stage of the class. And oh yeah, how can people sign up for the group, Troy, if it is open and if it's open for all? Seeing that in the chat.
Yeah, right now it's at SF State. It's technically a course, but I think maybe next semester, which is my last semester, by the way, I'm gonna hopefully do it again and then have a parallel like community version that's open to the public. And also willing to like like collaborate on that too, because I'm only one person.
Thank you so much for all your work. All right, I think I'm gonna hand it off to Tiera, and we're gonna talk about collective care.
Thank you. Hi, I also just wanted to thank all of our speakers as well. You all were absolutely breathtaking. Thank you so, so much. As for everyone else, I just want to thank you all for being in and adding tremendous amounts of love, knowledge, and care to this space. It really does mean a lot to have you all here. We all heard, learned, and many of us talked about and shared some extremely difficult things today, issues that affect many of our personal lives. And of course, those topics and learning are extremely important, but so is your health and your care. So I just want to take a few minutes to let us all settle down and relax. Please allow yourself to find a position that you're comfortable in. Try to keep your back upright as best as you can. Let your hands lay wherever they naturally go. You're welcome to close your eyes, or if that's something you're not comfortable with, it's okay to keep them open. Invite your body to fully relax and feel the connection of your body to your chair, bed, the floor, or wherever you're sitting. Notice your breath. Tune into its rhythm. We'll take a moment to do 4 belly breaths together. We'll breathe in for about 3 seconds, pause for around 2, and breathe out for around 4. It's okay if you need to breathe slightly differently, that's totally fine. So let's start with number 1. Breathe in, pause, and breathe out. Breathe in, pause, breathe out. Breathe in, pause, and breathe out. Last one. Breathe in, pause, and breathe out. I invite you all now to open your eyes. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to share this space with you. Before we end, I ask that you please allow yourself to feel self-gratitude and appreciation for what you all do and for participating in this breathing exercise. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Tiera. I just want to add before we sort of close out that we've been taking into account everything that has been happening on Monday. So we're reaching out to our white speakers and just checking in ahead of time and trying to screen as much as possible. If not, if they come across as problematic or having BIPOC speakers instead, or just asking them to not speak. So we're taking in everything that people share. We want to make this a safe space as much as possible, and we always welcome feedback. Hopefully next time, either on September 27th, we have a dedicated space to talk about collective care, or on October 4th, but it's still more to come. We're still figuring out collective care with you all. Thank you. Okay, so we're just closing out this session now. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night. I'm not sure if the other coordinators want to say anything too. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight and being in safe space. Sleep well, take care of yourselves, drink lots of water again.